Hey beautiful people, my name's Brittany.
And I'm Conor.
And today we're going to be sharing about our Lotus Birth.
With Ilya Gray Fox.
With Ilya Gray Fox, McMillan Taylor.
Our membership site is growing and we want you to be a part of it.
We have over 100 videos, so many exercises, tons of ways for you to learn, grow, heal, and inspire with us.
Come on over and see what it's all about. So, Brittany, I'm curious, what is Lotus Birth?
Well, Conor, I'm so glad you asked. Basically, a Lotus Birth is where you, after birth, the baby is attached to the placenta by the umbilical cord, and most oftenly, we see that cut. Oftenly, is that a word?
No.
Most often we see that the cord is cut, and usually quite quickly. And Lotus Birth is where you keep the cord intact. You basically just like leave everything as it is until it naturally comes undone, naturally falls off. And there's variations of that, and there's delayed cord clamping, and there's a lot in that area. And we're gonna kind of share about our version of Lotus Birth and what we did.
Yeah, and it was like we knew that we definitely wanted to keep the placenta attached for X amount of time. I mean, I knew that like a long time ago when I first started looking into more natural childbirth, and this was before I even met you.
Oh, cool.
I had heard about keeping the placenta attached at least long enough for that initial like of blood and nutrients to go into the baby, which Brittany can talk a little bit more about in detail. And then we had a friend who we heard about who had her like a free birth on her own, and also did this Lotus Birth, and she just waited until the cord dried up and detached on its own. And then I think she ate the placenta too.
I think she also ate some of the placenta.
Okay, so all those things I heard in one go, and I was like, that is crazy.
Yeah.
But you know, as time went on, we decided we definitely wanted to do a free birth, which we did, and we also decided we wanted to do a Lotus Birth, or as close to it that made sense for us as possible. And so that's what we did. And we didn't wait until the cord fell off on its own, but pretty much, and we can get into more detail on that.
Yeah, we waited, I think it ended up being 3 days.
Yeah, it was a full 72 hours.
And the cord had dried up. It was kind of like a rawhide. Mm-hmm. And we were just like, Ilya had quite a short cord.
Yeah, it was like 18 inches, I think we determined. And
for 3 days, while I'm in like the peak of healing postpartum body, we're like hobbling around with Ilya and the placenta, which was in this bag that you'll see, and like taking baths was especially interesting. We had this plank, this board we would lay on.
Yeah, and like place the placenta on top of the board, and then like Ilya could like bathe with Mama.
It was challenging, especially because Conor left on maybe the third day to go do the birth certificate, and I remember while you were gone just trying to maneuver this baby and I was just like, my vagina did not want to be like squatting up and down yet, so it was, it felt really good to detach it, like to cut it at that point.
And it made sense once for us, once it had dried out completely. We felt like there's no more transfer happening here. And I think part of the Lotus Birth of letting it do its own thing is also about like the metaphor of it all, you know, and being in a more peaceful place. Like there's no rush. This is like a natural part of the process. And it did force us to slow down the 72 hours that we did have it attached. It sounds like most often if you let it fall off on its own, it's like 7 to 10 days, but I'm sure there's variation there as well.
Yeah, some people it falls off in like 3 days, and I think people I've heard that from, they're more like out in the sun, and we were like in a dark, I was in like a cocooned room.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about like the big benefits?
Yeah, I'll talk about why I felt drawn to doing it. And then maybe you can talk about how we
prep.
Yeah, because Conor really took care of preserving the placenta for us. So I felt pretty much immediately drawn to it after that first, like, whoa, that's weird. And I think some people feel really called to eat their placenta or consume it in some way. Some people feel drawn to Lotus Birth. Some people maybe neither. And I never felt drawn to consume my placenta, which like I have no judgment about either way. I think it would have been really cool if I felt that, and I just didn't.
Yeah.
And I did feel really drawn to Lotus Birth. And I'm not like a Lotus Birth educator, and I just like know what I know from my intuition and from what I've read and listened to in podcasts about it. So that's what I'm going to be sharing about. But there are some really great books if you want to learn more about that, and I can link a couple down below. So I felt drawn to it mostly because I felt like this incredible organ that my body grew has been nourishing this being for so long, and just like, wow, this is incredible. And I kind of felt like it's attached for a reason. It's not becoming naturally detached.
It doesn't just come off when you give birth.
Right. And that felt interesting. I also have felt like it's not mine completely. Like, I feel like it's very much something I share with Ilya. And that's another thing, kind of like, well, yeah, I'll just mention now that I've decided I want to just save it. So we have the placenta in our freezer, and offer for Ilya to bury it with me under a tree or something like that. Or maybe they won't want to do that, but I think it could be fun to do together because it's this really like sacred, amazing thing. I felt like I was drawn to this idea of slowing down and like being energetically connected, kind of like transitioning from out of the womb in this slower way. That was a big draw for me. The benefits of like delayed cord clamping in general, or just waiting until there's no more like blood supply happening through the cord, are incredible. And it's really interesting how much like we see in traditional like medical birth, how much the cord is cut right away, and then sometimes doctors are trying to resuscitate the baby, which is crazy because some like up to a third or maybe even half of the blood supply can still be in the placenta, and there's like time where that regulates, you know, after birth. And I'm not sure exactly how much time, but I've heard different things, like 3 minutes, 10 minutes, definitely in the first few minutes, or up to 10 minutes if you can wait for that cord to be clamped. Even in medical situations, you might have that option. It's just incredible what that can mean, you know, like for babies who otherwise would be seen as like having a low blood supply. It's like, well, just let it get there. Just give it another minute. And then also, you know, like, I know not everybody's really familiar with newborn transition, but newborns don't need to breathe right away because, you know, they haven't been breathing in utero. They're getting their oxygen from the placenta. So as long as that's still attached, you know, your baby might take a minute or a minute and a half to start breathing and come earthside and in this way and use their lungs, and that's okay because they're getting blood from the placenta. And maybe if you've seen my birth video, I try to keep the baby sort of low. And one of the reasons for that is just so that, you know, there's not this extra, so gravity's sort of working on our side so that the blood from the placenta can more easily go. And it regulates too. It's not just like all this blood's flowing to the baby. It's kind of like, just like it's always been in utero, it's regulating how much everything the baby needs and how much oxygen.
Yeah, and all of this, part of it has been well documented scientifically, and there's tons of studies that show that like the benefits of literally waiting an extra 3 minutes before cutting the cord can make all the difference. So there's nutrient exchange, there's blood exchange, and there's hormone exchange. So to me, that's communication. Like there's a lot of communication happening. Yeah.
And an interesting thing is, like, if you pinch the cord, you'll notice your baby will react. So that's another way you can kind of know, like, if you are wanting to wait for a while, but maybe not do like a full-on Lotus birth or even wait multiple days as we did, you can sort of see, like, is there blood still going through the cord, or is the cord drying up?
Yeah.
Because the cord does dry up at least a little bit pretty quickly. And then there's like, if you pinch it, like, is your baby responding in any way? And I've heard people say that like up to a few days later, their baby's still like responding. And for us, I feel like Ilya didn't really. No. Yeah.
After, you know, a couple hours, the cord was already starting to get kind of opaque. So it started out pretty like purple and red and even pulsing. And it was like clearly there was communication happening there. And then, definitely over the first day, it just slowly became whiter and clearer. And maybe there wasn't a whole lot going on. Maybe there was like nothing going on, but it still felt good for us just to take the time and not feel like we had to rush it. And it's funny, I don't know if I told you this, but my ex-wife, who's a close friend of mine, had said something about like, what about their belly button? What are you gonna do about their belly button? And it's just, it's cool that, you know, and she had a child, but like many of us just don't know like how this stuff works because we're in a hospital and we just kind of like give it up to the establishment as it was. But the belly button is just created, you know? And what they do in the hospital generally is they clamp it and then they put a little, you know, tie on it or whatever, put a little cloth on it. And then that little tail falls off eventually. And that's exactly what we did. And it's exactly what happened for Ilya. And Ilya's belly button is just perfect.
It's so cute.
And adorable. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, we didn't need to tie it or clamp it or anything because when we cut it, it was like hard, like it had created its own seal because the blood was all dried up.
Yeah.
And then we just waited and like it took till day 7 to completely come off. There was like this little bit and then it like kind of gooped out the last little bit.
And we didn't mess around with it, you know, we just like let it do its thing and kind of just kept an eye on it, you know, made sure that it wasn't getting infected or anything like that. And,
there was
and
nothing like that.
It was perfect.
And the Lotus, you know, I think a lot of people are like, well, what do you do with the placenta over these days? You know, 3 days, 7 days, maybe even 10 days. And we did a lot of research on that and I'm excited for you to share about how you kind of like preserved it so we could bring it around. And people do it differently, but I think this is a really great method. And it wasn't like gross and it didn't smell at all. It smelled kind of good.
Well, it smelled like herbs because we put herbs in it. It kind of smelled like Thanksgiving. So what we did is basically just a lot of salt, a lot of rock salt that preserves meat and you know, it preserves the placenta. And so we had like this little diaper bag that we used, which was actually waterproof, and I put it in a plastic bag. I salted it all and then we added a bunch of herbs to it, and including rosemary and lavender, maybe some thyme. It was like a few different herbs. All of them are preserving type herbs, and then just a lot of salt, like a lot of salt, and to the point where like the placenta kind of absorbs it on the outside and then you put on more. And it was like a couple times a day I would just open it up and check it and maybe add a little more salt. I think I only took it out once, maybe twice, and like really resalted it and then put it back in. For the most part, I really didn't have to mess around with it. And it smelled great by the time we cut it and preserved it and put it in the freezer. It was awesome. Oh, I did use like a cheesecloth initially. So salted it, herbs, cheesecloth, a little more salt, plastic bag, and then inside this diaper bag. And then the cord was just, you know, running over to baby, and we'd carry around this little satchel.
Yeah, the diaper bag, it's called a wet dry bag, and we got one of the small ones.
Yeah.
And then I also did want to mention that initially when I birthed the placenta, I birthed it over a bowl with a strainer on top. And
like
actually,
a colander.
It's funny, we didn't have either of those items, so we specifically just cut. We like went to the store, we're like, let's
These
get
are
a
for
bowl
our placenta.
Yeah, and so it's good to let that drain a little bit first.
Yeah, we didn't do anything with it at least for a few hours, right?
Oh yeah, I was just hanging out with Ilya in the bowl. And
and that was totally fine. Like that seemed really good.
Oh yeah, we could have hung out for like maybe even a day.
Probably, yeah. And that's basically it. And yeah, it was definitely helpful to have 2 hands with it. You know, everyone's cord is a different length. Ours just happened to be pretty short, or rather Ilya's, I guess. But even still, it was definitely doable. And like Brittany was saying, you know, even if you just wait a little bit longer, the benefits are huge.
Yeah.
So, and you can ask for that in a hospital setting too. You know, you can really ask for what you need in a hospital. They may or may not be open to it, but you can always ask for it and tell them why. We had a friend who ended up going to the hospital, and she asked for that, you know, otherwise she wouldn't have gotten it. She asked for it and she got it, and I just think that's really cool.
I think she might have even taken her placenta home.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
I just imagine that we're not going to make a dedicated video on this, and there might be questions about this. So, placenta delivery, this last stage of labor that is like often not talked about, I think is so important. There's a ton of great podcasts on it on our resource page. But in case if people are curious, for me, it was really simple. I was in the birthing tub for about 10 minutes after Ilya's birth. And then I just got out of the birthing tub, squatted over a bowl, and like, I mean, I imagine I pushed some amount or just like let relax, but it just felt like it was right there. So I mean,
that was cool.
With the nature of our undisturbed birth, it really makes sense to me that that's how it was. And it was really simple and really empowering. And I think it's really worthwhile understanding more about if you're interested in birthing a child, to understand more about birthing the placenta and the relationship between the placenta and the baby.
Absolutely, yeah. So many birth videos end right after the baby is born,
right?
And that's fine, but you know, there is this other piece of it that needs to still happen, and for some people that takes a while. You know, I don't think I want to get into like the variation there, but yeah, like for us, it was really cool that it happened quickly and it was really easy. But there's tons of variation there, variation of normal. And if you don't know it, then it's all kind of abnormal, you know?
Yeah, totally.
So.
Yeah, I recommend checking out Indie Birth. The Indie Birth podcast is just amazing. They have so much information about that last bit.
Awesome. Love you guys.
Yeah, love you so much. Thanks for watching. Thank you.